Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Asteri Sofia Kairos. Sonia from Celestia Astrology, and I'm here with your weekly forecast from the 21st to the 28th of January, going Wednesday to Wednesday for week 4. So what is the one story you've been telling yourself so you can stay comfortable, maybe in a role or a friendship, or perhaps in an online space, anywhere where you're meeting others, but you're starting to feel like you no longer fit? It feels like this last part of January is here to gently and firmly ask you for the truth. It's showing us our fears. It's showing us all those things that we've been quietly tucking away, hiding away around the place. And now Pluto's entered the conversation and he is really showing everything up now for us. So we've moved from Capricorn's steady building and planning phase that we were working on into the Aquarian, clear, cool, this bird's eye view that Aquarius offers us, this visionary look that always makes me feel a little bit dizzy, can trigger the vertigo. We've got Mercury, the Sun, Mars, all meet Pluto in these first degrees of Aquarius. And at the same time, almost while we're distracted looking over here, Neptune will slip over that threshold into Aries, beginning this long, slow shift as he makes a slow journey through Aries in how we feel courage, how that shows up for us, and our willpower, how that feels from the inside out. So this week we may see some recalibration of power, first in the mind with Mercury, and then in how you show up. And finally in the deeper why behind your actions. Maybe we'll get some insight on that. My aim today is to walk you through the key dates, to look at these transits, where they're showing up in the chart, and how they're likely to land in real life for you, and hopefully offer you some practical ways to work with this so that you experience more of a supportive reset. So on the 21st, we've got a Mercury Cazimi as Mercury meets the Sun at 01 degrees 36 minutes of Aquarius. And the next day, that's followed by Mercury meeting Pluto at 3 degrees 23 minutes. And the day after that, Mars is the last one to enter Aquarius. On the same day, at 3 degrees and 25 minutes of Aquarius, we've got the Sun conjunct Pluto. 26th will be the day that Neptune enters Aries. Now, we did have a taste of Neptune in Aries in 2025, and then it retrograded back to Pisces. So we've had an introduction of how this may feel individually for us, but now it's gone in for the long haul. It's going to be there for 14 years. So it's going to be the last time in our lifetimes really to experience that Neptune in Pisces energy. And then on the 27th, we have Mars conjunct Pluto at 3 degrees 34 minutes of Aquarius. So that's the final planet that's going to meet Pluto. We have all those personal planets, all that focus of energy that was in Capricorn, in that earthy, grounded place that really brought us into the planning and the forecasting and the pragmatic ways that it was working and shifting through our lives. And now it's much more about our minds and our vision for the future in a collective way. So let's take the first one, Mercury's turning point. So this week's story is beginning in our minds, and all of the major Aquarius activity this week is happening in the first decan of Aquarius. That's between 0 and 10 degrees. And the Wild Way Oracle deck has called this decan Broaden Your Horizons, and it's all about getting out of our comfort zone and seeking new horizons, seeking new adventures, which is very much meeting the Aries energy as well. And the decan itself is ruled by Venus and Saturn, which tells us that this is grounded change. We're looking to widen our perspective in a way that's going to be principled and mature and rooted in our values. And at the same time, bounds are a much smaller division and they're not all equal. This first meeting of Mercury and the Sun occurs in the bounds of Mars. And you'll see this picture that I've got here of the Sun setting and Freddie Mercury. I don't know if it's actually him, but somebody in a pose that always makes me think of Freddie Mercury. It's a very familiar pose that he had. And of course, he rebranded himself and took on that name Mercury and told his stories through his music and through his art. So this is how we see the Sun, Saturn, Mercury, Venus, Mars, all these rulers coming together. The power that he had to hold the crowd in his hand at an event would be something that you would experience. So this is like the clarity that the Mercury cazimi might offer us. So with this meeting of Mercury and the Sun in this Mars-ruled bound, there's this undertone of urgency that Mars wants to get moving. Mars likes to take action. It's a time when decisions need to be acted on. And Mercury is going to be the one that opens the door for us. So when Mercury is cazimi at the first degree of Aquarius, he'll be right in the heart of the Sun. When Mercury has been combust as he was reaching the Sun, our thinking can feel scrambled or overheated. I personally have had ongoing problems with my laptop, but I'm hoping that once we get to the cazimi that I will get some understanding of what's actually going on and what I need to do to resolve this. And that's because in a cazimi, Mercury receives this solar clarity. There's a death and a rebirth, an ending of the old cycle, a renewal and a beginning. There's a purification process that the heat of the Sun is purifying. So we imagine this messenger sitting in the throne room with the king. And again, this is why I think of Freddie Mercury, because he would come out on stage with his regal robes on. It makes me think, oh yes, this is like a Mercury cazimi. So it's the time when a planet meets the Sun, receives direct instructions, and the Sun here is in the role of the king. So it's as though a planet is receiving this private audience, which is a very privileged position, very empowered position. So this is a time of empowerment for the planet. And that's why we say that it is clarity, because if we choose to tune in on those days, quite often there can be insights and downloads that come through. But in Aquarius, it may not be personal or individual as much as it is collective. Saturn here is about what's being created, what systems are going to be for the greater good, to the groups that we belong to, the structures that hold society up. So we may get more insights about our roles at work, friendship groups, or online. And it would also depend on where Aquarius falls in your chart. And that's an important thing to understand as well. If you have an air rising sign, for example, if you're Gemini, Libra, or Aquarius rising, then all of this change at the beginning of Aquarius is likely to affect you more significantly. Or if you have one of the fixed signs, so the other three, Taurus, Leo, and Scorpio, are all either square or opposite to Aquarius. So they'll have a more challenging relationship with all of these changes. So the things to look out for is to notice if your thinking has become rigid or if you've become more anxious about things. And it may be that the cazimi will be drawing your attention to that. Look to your Aquarius house. That's the area of life where this rebirth is taking place, where this new perspective wants to come in. So it might be that you have an honest conversation that opens up the space for the changes that you need, or a journaling session where you are able to reach your own insights, or you make planning time for yourself. We also need to be aware of the shadow side. Notice any temptation to believe that you know what's best for everybody else, or to speak for others rather than listen. Just allow the clarity to come to you without feeling that you're the messenger that must make it into a manifesto for everybody. And then on the 22nd, Mercury moves straight from that conjunction with the Sun into a conjunction with Pluto. So it's almost like those balls in that pinball machine where the ball's being batted backwards and forwards. So this is going into the depths. Pluto's been associated with Hades, the lord of the underworld. He represents the shadows, the dark spaces, the things that we don't want to face, our fears. And he also represents power and very mundane things like plumbing, things that are underground. So it's like we're having a mental detox with this death and rebirth that comes in with the Pluto-Mercury conjunction as they prepare to bring in a new cycle, a new relationship, a new agenda that they agree together when they meet. They offer us a sharp, penetrating insight, and together they can dig up, excavate what has been buried in the mind. Sometimes those old stories that we can't quite let go of, or fixations, or quiet resentments that we don't always give voice to, or the way that we've given our power away, especially in a group setting. So you might find yourself replaying stories that you can't let go of, and see if you can shift that by bringing awareness to this Mercury Pluto moment and asking yourself, what power dynamic is being shown to me here? Have you edited yourself to belong? Have you given up your power or suppressed a part of yourself, hidden away a part of yourself? Or have you been trying to control the narrative? What is that dynamic there? What is the balance? And could you improve it? Is there something you can do to make it more comfortable? Because we are talking about this death and rebirth process, and it's metaphorical, it's not literal, but we have a chance to release some old thought patterns, which is an opportunity for these old stories that we replay. And the reason the mind does that is because it's trying to solve things. You know, if you've replayed a story to yourself 10 times and you haven't solved it, and then you try repeating that story to other people and they don't offer you solutions either, there really is nothing that the mind's going to be able to gain by holding on to it and repeating it again. So we can work with this by consciously bringing those old stories to the front of our minds and being ready to release them. You may be having conversations over boundaries in community or social media, or you may be making a quiet decision to step back from a role that no longer fits the person that you're becoming with these shifts. So this Mercury Cazimi is strongest on the 21st, and the Mercury-Pluto conjunction is most intense on the 22nd. But together they're describing a longer period of time when the planets are in engagement with each other, and we're undergoing this mental reset within that Aquarius decan as Mercury is pinballing between the Sun and Pluto. Use these days for deep thinking, therapy, writing, journaling, strategy, meditating, whatever works for you, anything that lets you clear the air in your own mind. And before we move from the realm of thoughts into the realm of action, just bring your attention to your breath and take a moment to come back into your body. Notice your jaw, your shoulders, your belly. Has Mercury, Pluto and this talk of power, does that have you holding your breath or any tension in your body or clenching without realizing? The next part of this week is much more physical, and your body may well be the place where some of these choices will land. So we move on to looking at the Sun and Mars with Pluto. After the mind has been recalibrated with Mercury, the focus now shifts to who you are becoming and how you act as we see the Sun and Mars now move through these same early Aquarius degrees. So everything's happening in this first decan of Aquarius called Broaden Your Horizons with this Venus-Saturn tone. So it seems that everything that's happening now around power, identity and conflict can be seen through the lens of one question that we could ask ourselves, which is, does this reflect my real values? And am I willing to take responsibility for the consequences? So on the 23rd, we see the Sun meeting Pluto at 3 degrees of Aquarius. Now we're looking at how you show up in the world, how you shine. The Sun as conscious will, our sense of direction, the roles that we step into, our noetic light, which is a beautiful way of describing it. Pluto brings this contact with the shadow material and things that have been buried. So we might see this very simply as a realization that a role that we've held, a title or a public identity, a way that we've been known, doesn't fit us anymore. It's time for a change. The old version of you has been changing quietly, slowly, and now it's impossible to ignore the mismatch. And you may feel this as a surge of creative power. With Pluto, it can feel almost volcanic. Sort of, it starts as a whisper and then it becomes something that you're propelled along with, this desire to live more truthfully. Others might feel it as a deep fatigue with the old ways, just burning out and just needing to be discarded. So if you notice a pull within you to withdraw a little around this date, see if you can honor it, make some space to give yourself the rest that you need, especially if your chart is activated. And if you have placements in the early degrees, especially if the fixed or the air signs. Pluto can be intense for the nervous system. It's important to get rest if you need it because there's a lot of internal processing, composting, what you're releasing and alchemizing it. I always see when planets meet or there's a transit that there can be an invitation. So here I feel like the invitation is to allow something about how you are seen to die so that this true expression of yourself can emerge, that sometimes we've got to close the one door so that another door can open. And we have to make space for that new you to be seen. And this might be something small, like how you introduce yourself, or it might be closing a project that you've outgrown. So see if you can name, even if it's just to yourself or to your journal, one identity that you're ready to release now. And then secondly, notice any power dynamics around your visibility. Have you been dimming your own light to keep others comfortable or to fit in? Or have you been over dominating in a space, maybe out of fear or vulnerability? Notice if either extreme has been showing up for you. And then finally, see if you can commit to one concrete way that you might express your values more visibly this year. And again, this can be informed by where Aquarius is in your chart. Then things start heating up as on that same day, Mars will enter Aquarius. So that's the last of the planets to leave Capricorn. We see Mars, the fiery planet, the warrior planet, enters this Aries sign ruled by Saturn. And we've got the Sun, Pluto, and Mars all very close together now. Mars in Aquarius. Mars takes action. Mars can cut and sever. And in Aquarius, it's a warrior for principles. It's fighting for the group, for the future, for the visions and the ideas that we can do things better and differently. So you may, in this Aquarius part, you might have a drive to act or separate. There may be conflicts or decisions that have been simmering previously that may now ask for you to take decisive action. This is preparation for the Mars-Pluto conjunction, because as soon as Mars enters, he'll go into engagement with Pluto. So notice if you suddenly feel compelled to fight for collective values or groups, or in social or technological spaces, for example, workers' rights or digital boundaries, and take care to have honest communication in your friendship networks. There's a lot of passion here, and it needs to be channeled in a healthy way. And I always say that be aware, even if you're finding it quite manageable, these transits, be aware that other people are also experiencing them, and it might be affecting their chart more strongly. They might be acting out of character. So allow some grace if people are struggling with this, because this is getting quite intense now as Mars and Pluto prepare to meet. And I kind of feel like with Venus and Saturn as well ruling this decan, Mars is kind of being asked to grow up a little bit, especially with Saturn being the lord of time. So it's like looking at the long-term consequences of the action that Mars wants to take. And Venus is asking, well, what values? Why are you wanting to act like that? You might feel called to speak up for yourself or for others. You might also see a lot of drama going on online, a lot of Twitter spats and debates going on. And a good way to use this energy is to not get involved, rather than if your normal action would be to wade in and help out. It might be a power move to sit this one out, just because of the astrology. So then by the 27th, we see Mars meeting Pluto. So while there's so much happening in Aquarius, on the 26th, we get the one thing that's happening that isn't in that first decan of Aquarius this week. And yet, this is a very significant, big transit, the very first one of the year that astrologers have been talking about for quite some time. Neptune is ending the 14-year journey through Pisces, which for modern astrologers is its home that it rules. And it's now beginning a new story of courage by moving into Aries. Aries is Mars's first sign where the sun is exalted. And it's like we're zooming out a bit at the moment. We've been talking about regular astrology up to now, things that we might experience every year. And now suddenly this transit is in a different league. Neptune will be traveling through Aries until 2038. And there'll be some cha-cha as he retrogrades over the boundary, moving into Taurus. So we've got approximately 14 years if we include last year's ingress and the time when it will go backwards and forwards across the cusp of Taurus. So this is a very significant, what we call a generational collective shift. It's not so much about one event, it's more about long changes that will unfold for us personally, but also for the collective, that can be attributed to a generation in time with hindsight. Neptune represents the ocean of consciousness. Neptune dissolves, it brings longing, it offers compassion. It's a spiritual planet. can also make us want to escape into that spiritual side or escape from the mundane or earthly world. So sometimes that can bring intoxication or other ways that people escape. And sometimes fog, confusion, and just general detachment. And in Pisces, that ocean can be turned inward. We'll look back and write the collective story of that time, looking at what's emerged. Certainly in our oceans, a lot has been discovered. And the collective narrative, we can see how this is changing and shifting right now around the world about how people, nations are having enough of bad governance and are seeking to dissolve the old structures and the old ways. And zero Aries is even more significant. So Neptune's ingress into any sign would be significant because of the length of time that Neptune spends in a sign. But to have an outer planet crossing zero Aries is even more significant. Zero Aries is the spring equinox. It marks the birth of something new, the start of spring. Literally, that emergence of fresh life. So it's like that same ocean, that collective dream that we had has now undergone its own death and rebirth. And now we see it emerging fresh and new in this youthful sign of Aries. Aries is like raw life force. It hasn't been disillusioned by life yet, by the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. It's about I am and I act. And when you blend Neptune with Aries, we start to think about the spirit of what Neptune represents. How does that move through our own individual courage because of Mars representing our courage and our willpower? And we look at how action before has been driven by ego or fear, and where can it now be purified by these cleansing waters of Neptune? And of course, we all know when water itself meets fire. When I was looking for a picture to show water and fire, most of the time all I could find was the firefighters. And I thought, okay, yeah, but I wanted to bring something a little bit more positive than the firefighting because that's not proactive. It's putting the old fires out. So I chose this picture because it shows that creative spark and using that movement and willpower of Mars, and it's that fire by the ocean. But usually it makes us think of when fire and water mix, that heat is going to rise. So steam can be a power that pushes forward. It can also cause an explosion when there's too much of it, depending on how or if it's contained. But it makes me think of the innovation of the steam engine and what a difference it made. So where is the steam going to be applied now, this time with Aries? And I wonder if the other outer planets give us the insight to that, because we have Pluto and Aquarius. So maybe that's showing us something about the power structures and the collective and how they're changing. And we have Uranus finishing its time in Taurus and about to move into Gemini. So that's showing us about information structures. So I wonder if the fact that they're all going to connect by trine or by sextile over the course of this year, they're going to move in and out of how that connection's formed. But generally, once Uranus moves into Gemini, these connections are going to be set up. And I wonder if that's going to inform Neptune and also Saturn, because of course that is going to flavour this ingress. Saturn is a slow-moving planet as well. Oh, and Austin Coppock and Chris Brennan in their forecasts always say that the ingress holds the energy of the entire transit, which if you're looking at a transit of the sun through one side and it's only a month, we tend to not pay as much attention to it. But for something like this where it's a longer transit, it's very significant when you're thinking of a 14-year transit, that the fact that Neptune is doing this together with Saturn is very significant. So while Neptune wants to dissolve, Saturn is looking to build structures and reinforce boundaries and borders. So I don't have all the answers, and it's important to say that when we don't. We can say what the significations are and what the signs mean and what the connections are, but I think we're all going to be watching to see what actually happens. All I do know is that the theme that came up when Neptune entered last year in 2025 for its first ingress of the tariffs has re-entered now, just just as Neptune's getting to those final anoretic minutes of leaving Pisces, that has re-entered the narrative. And that makes me think that the current debate over tariffs and Greenland and NATO are going to be more significant than maybe they seem initially. And with the shift from a sign Pisces that represents the collective, the endless ocean, and us all being one in the ocean, to this very individual, who am I, nature of Aries. I think maybe Neptune in Aries is purifying this will and bringing that steam, that action that Mars wants to take, that's propelling us forward, dissolving some of our old collective illusions and maybe putting in place some new ones, some heroes, some Aries warrior type heroes that may step up as well. There is a shadow side. I've already used some of those words, that disassociation when life feels demanding, just wanting to step away from it, especially around conflicts or decisions. It's that inaction, really, wanting to avoid or escape. And Mars wants to make those decisions. So again, that can be that feeling of being trapped between the two forces. And especially we see that as well with Saturn and Neptune, both pulling in opposite directions. There can be delusions, particularly in Aries, maybe, of thinking if you fight or sacrifice, you can save, become the hero, or be rescued. There can be escapism through busyness as well, or through doom scrolling, or seeking adrenaline over substance. Spiritualized anger as well could be a thing. There was, I think, McCarthyism came in before under a Neptune in Aries transit. If you recognize these happening, use them as a signal to slow down and ask yourself, what are you trying not to feel? And if you can name it, even if you don't want to feel it yet, even just naming it or acknowledging its existence can help. We might also see a way that innocence can start being seen as strength, because Aries, as the first sign in the zodiac, is associated with naivety, with the Fool's journey, the Fool being the first card of the tarot, setting out and being willing to take the first step in trust, not knowing quite how the journey will unfold. And there's that kind of naivety that allows you to take the first steps when others might be overthinking things or needing to have everything planned out. So trusting that you could just take a small, sincere move, those quiet first steps that will open doors. So see if you can lean into that kind of energy at this time. That will be supported. Taking that first step and just try and make it small, but trusting that the path will unfold as you move forwards. I've mentioned collective dreams, and we have the collective dream in Pisces that might be dissolving now as we move into the heat of Aries, and the focus is moving back onto the individual. But Neptune will always be reminding us that we as individuals are part of a greater collective, and that our own actions can ripple out and affect others. So be conscious of what you're saying no to and what you say yes to, and try and place your gifts where they benefit you, but also benefit everybody around you. Metaphysically, Neptune in Aries might be seen as the divine creative spark, looking for new ways to move through us as humans. And each time you choose a small act that's aligned with spirit and trust in the spirit of Aries, you're participating in that. So it could be very modest. So, for example, just taking a breath before you send an angry email or participate in a social media spat, or when you change direction in work or a relationship. When you've done that consciously, then the action becomes more significant. The 2026 is going to be a significant year. Neptune isn't the only outer planet that's moving. We've also got Saturn and Uranus as well. We are all going to feel these collective shifts, and this is just the first. So we might feel confused. Neptune is a planet that does bring this fog down on us and make us feel confused, especially if it's aspecting our charts. And that's quite normal at the beginning of this long chapter, because we don't know where it's going yet. We've got a long time to figure this out as well. We don't have to have it all figured out in the first week. Just notice where you feel courage and where you feel the confusion. That's the best way to start with it. Just noticing and trusting it as well, because this is where we're meant to be. If you know your rising sign, we can have a look at where this purification of our courage, where this intensity is for us over the coming years. So if you're fire rising, that's Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius, Neptune in Aries is going to be activating your first, ninth, and fifth houses. So it's going to be looking at identity, belief, and creativity. So we're thinking about ways that our natural courage can become a vehicle for spiritual experimentation rather than performance, allowing your sense of self, your faith, your beliefs, and your creative expression to be reshaped now by what feels genuinely alive for you, rather than worrying about what looks impressive to yourself or to others. If you're a water rising sign, that's Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces, Neptune is moving through your 10th, 6th, and 2nd house. So that's bringing together themes of vocation, service, resources, daily routines, the chop wood, carry water. So you might be having a longing for a more soulful life. Just let that gently permeate into your career, your daily work, and your relationship with money and self-worth. If you have an earth rising sign, that's Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn, Neptune's traveling through your 12th, your 8th, and your 4th houses. These can be more difficult houses, some of them, and some are more internal. So we're looking at maybe considering retreat, deep healing, and home. These themes are softened for us. We're invited into subtler layers of surrender around safety and control. So maybe this deeper spiritual ground is emerging between the old patterns. So look to surrender those old patterns around those themes. Before we move to the air signs, you might like to hold a simple seed thought for this whole Neptune and Aries journey for you. If your life were a quiet experiment in sacred courage, what would the next first almost invisible step look like today? Not thinking of big dramatic gestures, but just the next aligned move for you. And just let that image sit at the back of your mind as we look at the air signs. So the air rising signs are Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius. Neptune's moving through your 11th, 7th, and 3rd houses. So this brings in themes of friends, partners, and everyday conversations. Your local area, siblings. And these areas might become more porous for you or imaginal. Notice how your connections and your words can be channels for vision and how you can bring in compassion. But do stay curious about what's actually real for you. And remember that Saturn will join Neptune in Aries. Early 2026, we're seeing this pure visionary beginning, this first whisper of this new timeline that we're moving into. And as Saturn arrives, the tone will shift slightly from what we're experiencing now. We'll feel this weight, this heaviness, the structure, the reality testing that Saturn brings in. We'll start to maybe ground these Neptunian themes that we're working with, that we've been talking about, into commitments and responsibilities and a more workable form. So for now, like I said, we don't have to know everything about what Neptune in Aries means for us. Just see what shows up in your life as this ingress happens. And finally, we have Mars conjunct Pluto in Aquarius at 3 degrees 34 minutes. And now that Neptune's shifted into Aries, this Mars conjunction with Pluto is actually sextile to Aries as well. So it's the first time really that this Pluto Aries connection has been activated. And of course, it's by Mars, the ruler of Neptune. And we have the moon as well in Gemini, bringing a trine to the Pluto Mars from the place where Uranus will be ingressing later in the year. So this is probably the most intense transit, certainly of this week. Mars-Pluto can be volcanic will, fierce determination, but it can also be deeply constructive or draining. So we do need to approach it with awareness. You may feel a pressure to do something now about a situation maybe involving friends, groups, activism, digital spaces, something with Aquarius type themes, and the themes of where Aquarius sits in your own chart. You might feel old anger or resentment about how you've been treated in the community, or you may experience feelings of power or powerlessness around large systems, governments, platforms, and institutions. So bringing in the Aquarius themes, but also Pluto and the power and the abuses of power. And as I've spoken before about the invitation, it's not to bypass the anger, but to acknowledge that it's there. Anger can be a healthy signal that we need to take action, and also to notice that an old way is ready to be released. If previously you would collapse and disappear under pressure or avoid a confrontation, then this rebirth of Mars and Pluto may be about to offer you a more boundaried and more courageous voice. Or if you used to push or dominate, then the rebirth might be inviting you to take on a more skillful listening form of leadership. Either way, we're being asked to release something old about the way that we approached enacting our willpower and bringing our courage, and to bring on something that's more aligned and would benefit the collective. So a good thing to ask yourself at this time is, do you have one draining obligation, alliance, or a role in your social or digital world that doesn't feel aligned with you anymore? You don't have to dramatically burn your bridges, but just choose one thread in your life that you're maybe being pulled to now cut or to renegotiate, something that you want to get more aligned with you. And look for one way that you can reform something that you can commit to. Mars Pluto can make incredible shifts when it is focused. So you can bring that intensity into constructive change that you've chosen consciously. So for example, you might want to update your tech boundaries. That can be quite a familiar signification. You might want to reshape a project or join or start a project that reflects the future that you believe in and that you want to bring in. But through all of this, do remember your body as well, because we're going through some significant shifts in the collective as well. The people around you might be bringing in more uncomfortable nervous energy than you're familiar with. So allow yourself time for rest and grounding practices if you use them. And if you don't know what I'm talking about with grounding practices, there'll be lots of videos on YouTube about grounding meditations or grounding practices, just to relax and center yourself. Take time off screens. A digital detox would be a good thing to do around now, because it runs deep to have the Sun, Mercury, and Mars all meet Pluto within this small pocket of time. And I've given you this image of this lighter in the dark, and it makes me think of like the concerts where everybody used to have their lighter, and how that's transitioned now to people holding up their smartphones. But there was something about the lighter, because obviously you could get your finger burnt if you held it for too long. And I don't think people holding up their smartphones has the same effect in the dark that light from people holding up their lighters would have. But it's just that spark, that flame that Mars can bring us, where it's willing to throw light, again with Pluto being that cave, that shadow, the darkness, the things that we haven't wanted to look at, and Mars bringing that fire, that impetus to change. This is a lot for us to hold this week. It's a long-term shift in our courage and a more annual recalibration of our power, as Sun and Mercury meeting Pluto's more annual. Mars might be every 2 years. So again, to bring it back down to earth, you want to look at where it's happening in your chart, and that will give you more idea about what themes you're actually working with in your Aquarius house and also in your Aries house. But the main thing to remember is that something about the patterns that you've been in up to now is meant to be released and to die away. It's not you, your capacity, or your worth. You're not losing power. You're just being invited to steward it differently and to move forward aligned to who you're growing into. It's an opportunity to grow into a new you and to allow that to emerge. Something else has to give way to make space. So there's 3 collective themes that we're working with this week: mental honesty with Mercury, Pluto; responsible power with Sun and Mars on Pluto; purified courage with Neptune in Aries. So I wish you well traveling through this week. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope to get out a special episode on Neptune in Aries because it is such a big shift, and we'll try then to do individual horoscopes. But because there is so much going on, and we obviously want to honor our own needs, and unfortunately none of us in the Asteri Sofia Kairos collective have a team behind us. We're all just individuals, all have either voluntary roles or full-time work or part-time roles, but that's what we hope to do. And we will be back with the following week, the 28th of January to the 4th of February, moving into February, and I'll be passing the baton on to another astrologer to take you through February. Okay, if you've enjoyed this, please do engage. Tell us what your experiences are of Neptune in Aries. and the Pluto conjunctions. I'd love to hear where you are in this threshold, this new story of courage that's coming through from you. And please do join us again. Thank you so much.